Robin has been growing strawberry plants in her house, and one of them produced a flower, and she's wondering, is it possible for that flower to set fruit because she recognizes there aren't any insects in her house to pollinate it. So is it possible for Robin to actually pollinate those flowers herself? And Robin, you're in luck. Yes, it is. So what you'd want to do is take your flower, and you're going to have to work with me a little bit here because I don't have the strawberry flower model, but this is a close relative. This is a cherry model. And you'll notice that around the petals, you'll have all of these little yellow structures, and they're the anthers. They're the male parts of the flower, and they're producing pollen. And in the center, you should have more. They'll be a little bit shorter than this, and you'll have a lot of them, maybe 50 or 75 or so structures like this sticking up that aren't as big as the anthers. And that's the stigma. Right there's where the pollen needs to land. That's the female part of the flower. When the pollen goes from the anther onto the stigma, then that's pollination. The pollen grain will actually start growing a little tube down through this style to where the seed is inside. And when that happens, then the fruit will be pollinated and will start to mature. But there's going to be a lot of these inside your flower where my model only has one. So get a paintbrush and go along your anthers and pick up some of the pollen, and then move it onto the stigma, and go pick up some more pollen and move it onto the stigma. Now, I think that will work. So I didn't do all of the other background work here. So you might have to look up a little bit more information, but there's two cases where that might not work perfectly. One is flowers that have both male and female parts in them, like the flower I was just holding, are what we call perfect flowers. And sometimes perfect flowers have mechanisms to try to promote outcrossing or try to promote the idea of getting pollen from one flower onto the stigmas or the female parts of another flower. And in that case, your strawberry flower, the pollen might be ready to be moved today, but the stigmas might not be ready to receive the pollen until maybe tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. Your pollen won't live forever. So if the timing of the maturation of the male and female parts isn't at the same time, then what I just suggested might not work unless you have 10 flowers. And then you can move, and that would always be better to move pollen from one flower onto the stigmas of another flower, particularly if those flowers are coming from different plants. So the other caveat that might take place is some plants are what we call self-incompatible. Even though they are perfect flowers and they have both male parts and female parts, the female parts can tell when the male or the pollen grain is actually coming from the same flower, and they won't allow it to germinate and grow down through the style to fertilize the seed.